Okay, let's move on to some Q&As, and we have a lot of them. I think that what we should start though with just a general question about defining discretionary spending versus non-discretionary spending, because some people felt that it wasn't clear on the chart when you were referring to sustainable consumption. Maybe you want to just define those terms.
Right. Maxify talks about discretionary, or Maxify reports discretionary spending. Let's think about it this way, and I'm going to use Maxify terms here. Maxify asks you for fixed expenses and predictable expenses, like housing costs, and special expenses that you expect to incur. Special expenses might include home renovations. They might include college for your kids, special vacations. In that category also will be insurance expenses, some of which Maxify provides for you, life insurance, others which it does not, disability insurance premiums, homeowners insurance premiums you have to provide. So the expenses that are not discretionary are housing expenses, those special expenses that I talked about, and taxes. And discretionary spending is everything else. And the way Maxify operates is to take all of the fixed expenses as given. Everything that's fixed is going to be funded. And then the discretionary expenses are basically what's left over, smoothed over your lifetime.
Okay. A number of people are asking, what are the actual chances of reduction of benefits in the future, and is that baked into the software? And maybe you want to just say how that's not. You can change that, and that's I'm assuming that's what you did.
Right. So Maxify offers you the opportunity to make assumptions about how Social Security benefits and how Social Security taxes will change over time. We know that the trustees of the Social Security system say that, and they've been saying publicly for a while now, that the system will be insolvent if nothing changes by 2035. So that's a fact. Now, how the Congress will adapt to that fact or respond to that fact is unknown. And I make no claim to be a political scientist or to be able to predict anything like that. But I would say that if we look at the history of how Congress has responded in the past, Congress has said, well, we could do this by just increasing taxes, or we could do it just by reducing benefits, or we could do both. And generally, they've done both. Now, you could also look at history and say that they have been very reluctant to reduce benefits for people who've already claimed. So from that perspective, you might say that the assumption that we're making that benefits will be reduced is very conservative. I prefer to be conservative because I'd rather have too much than not enough. And if benefits are reduced and we plan for them not to be reduced, then we're going to be short. If benefits are not reduced and we plan for them to be reduced, then we'll have a little extra. And I'd rather have a little extra.
Okay. The next question here is from Alan, and I think it's a good one, and it's similar to some other people's questions. He asks, how do you accommodate for a couple with large age differences, such as in his case 17 years, with both saving aggressively and both will have Social Security and some pension money, but both want to retire at the same time between the ages of 65 and 70, based on the oldest spouse? How would you deal with that?
Well, that's probably the most complicated situation that we face. That's very hard, because if you're thinking about retiring, let's say at 65 for the older spouse, that means that the younger spouse is going to be 48, and that means that for the younger spouse we're planning for 52 years of retirement, because we're assuming that the lifespan is not different. That's a long time to plan for. You can say, well, from the perspective of the analysis that I've walked through here, there's nothing special about that. You can calculate the number, you can calculate the assets required, and Maxify will in effect tell you what those assets are. The questions that I mentioned at the very beginning, and then said I was going to look squarely in the face and move on, those questions now are not for 30 years, they're for 50 years. And that, I think, is what makes it more difficult and more complicated. Although it's also true that if we were working with a couple that were the same age who wanted to retire at 65, or a couple like the one that Alan describes where they want to retire at 65 and 48, they're going to need more assets. The second couple is going to need more assets, because one of the spouses is going to live a lot longer than the other, and is going to live longer, likely live longer than 35 more years. So I would say, in summary, they're going to need more assets than they would if they were the same age, and they may want to pay a bit more attention to the uncertainties that are associated with a long retirement.
So back to the y'alls. This is a question from Jeff, but some other people were inquiring about this as well. Just a clarification: the Part B premiums are listed as $1,700 a year per person. Did you mean total medical insurance expenses, i.e., Part B plus supplement plus copays?
Let's go back here. I think they're looking at this number here, the Part B premiums.
Yeah, correct.
This is the average over the lifespan. So that is just Medicare Part B. That's not supplemental, and that is not Part D. And if I were being more realistic, I would have put in those premiums. But I did not put in any health insurance premiums, and I assumed that Medicare and Part B would be enough. Now, that's as a practical matter, that's clearly not accurate. But I was trying to keep it very simple, so I left that out. But clearly,
right.
if we were going to do go ahead.
I was going to say that some people were wondering why it's so high.
It's the lifetime average. So it gets and it grows substantially in the if we project according to the law and the way we expect things to develop, on average, that's what it turns out to be. Sad to say.
Sad to say, right. Okay, next question is from Brian, and a number of people are asking a similar thing. Is it reasonable to assume that as we age, we may have lower discretionary spending? For example, at 85, we will probably be spending less on travel. I know we can factor that in Maxify, but what's your take?
You can. We assume that it will be stable. Again, that is a conservative assumption. The data on this are pretty equivocal. It's difficult to say what people actually do. I've been in conversation with Kent Smetters, who is an economist at the Wharton School, and Kent has an interesting view, which is that once people retire, their spending is likely to decline because they're going to substitute leisure for spending, basically. And he thinks that it could drop pretty significantly so that you could have a stable living standard even though you're spending less. Does that make sense, Alex? Should I say that a different way?
I think
let me give an example of that. Let me give an example of that. So while you're working and earning, you may go to restaurants a lot because you're busy and you don't have time to cook. But once you retire, instead of going to restaurants and in effect hiring other people to cook for you, you may make more meals at home. And then you're going to have just the food cost instead of the food cost and the cost of the people to prepare the meal and the cost of having a table in a building that's not your house, right? So that it would not be surprising if people spend less on restaurants once they retire, and it would and you'd see more of that sort of thing in other areas besides just food preparation that would cause then discretionary spending to decline after retirement and without a reduction in the way in what people might think of as their quality of life. That's not something that we've dealt with here.
Okay, so the next question is from Kathy, and a number of people are asking about this. Could you, Jess, could you say more about how retiring now is expensive? To just give a little bit more context about that.
How retiring now is expensive.
More expensive.
I'm not sure I
understand usual. At the end of your slide, you were.
Because because risk-free interest rates are low. Let's think of it this way. Suppose that we wanted to fund $1,000 next year, and we wanted to fund it with a risk-free investment. If the risk-free rate of return is 0, then we need $1,000 this year to fund that $1,000 next year. If risk-free rates are 10%, then we need a little over $900 this year to fund $1,000 next year, right? Because the 10% on $900 is going to give us 90. That'll take us to 990, right? So it'd have to be like 905 or something like that. Would be what it would cost to fund $1,000 next year. And the further out you go, the more impact the higher interest rate, the higher risk-free rate of return has. So if risk-free rates of return are really high, then you're going to need less money today to fund a stream of future retirement spending than you will if interest rates are really low. And since right now, real interest rates are just about 0, if not a little negative. So that makes saving for retirement or funding retirement very expensive relative to what it would have been 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay, so this is a question from Mark, and it's about the y'alls in this case. What percent of assets do you assume are withdrawn annually in retirement? 3%, 4%? How does this amount play into lifetime income?
We're not assuming that a particular percentage is withdrawn, nor is Maxify, right? If you think about how Maxify is going to work on this, suppose that we've got a lifespan of 100, and let's make it really simple, right? Let's suppose that we're going to draw. We're going to spend the same amount every year, and we're getting the same amount of Social Security income every year, and we've got only two sources of income: Social Security and our assets. And to make it really simple, suppose that we have 10 years of we're 90. So what rate are we going to draw at? Well, and suppose we've got $100,000 to cover the last 10 years. Well, the first year we're going to draw 10,000 out of 100,000, so we're going to draw 10%. The next year we're going to draw 10,000 out of 90,000. That's 11%. The next year we're going to draw 10,000 out of 80,000. That's 12.5%, and so forth, right? So by the time you get to 99, you're going to draw 10,000 out of 10,000. That's 100%. So we're not using I think he's referring to sort of the Bengen rule kind of approach that says I'm going to draw a certain percentage of my assets, and I'm going to hope that I get a series of rates of return that allows me to draw a certain percentage of the assets every year. And in fact, the Bengen rule is that the original 4% rule says if I start with a certain amount of money, I will draw 4% of that amount. Suppose it's 100,000, I'll draw 4,000. Actually, it was 1,040,000, right? So I'm going to draw 40,000 the first year, and then I'm going to be able to draw 40,000 every year thereafter, no matter what happens to the level of assets. So that's what that 4% rule looks like. It's a very different model than what we're using here, because here we're using the risk-free rate of return, so we're confident we're going to earn that return, and so we're confident that we can make withdrawals of whatever we need to fund the spending that we plan to make, because we know that we're confident of how many assets will be left at the end of each year. Whereas with the 4% rule, we're spending with the expectation that our assets are going to fluctuate with the stock market, because a lot of the assets that Bengen was looking at were stock assets. And he was running simulations, in effect, and his simulations indicated that given the information on returns he had, that he could draw that 4%, and I think it was a 30-year retirement, and in every scenario he ran, people wouldn't run out of money. But it's a very different model than we're talking about here, because that's a risky model. In this case, we're talking about a no-risk model. If we should say that you can use Maxify to address risk, investment risk. I haven't done that here. That would have made this much more complicated. So I chose to stick with something simple here to start.
And just to complicate it even further, here's a question from Isaac and Jeffrey. It's basically the same question. Isaac asks, does this analysis change if we buy a deferred income annuity? And Jeffrey says, I have heard negative things about annuities. Can you speak in a general sense about their efficacy as a financial tool? When are they good to use and when not?
Oh, well, they're really they're related. Let's deal with them one at a time. So the income annuity in effect adds guaranteed or predictable income to Social Security income. So if we look at this, at the chart, and I'm assuming that people can still see the screen, then there would be more guaranteed up here. So now, income annuities are advantageous if you want more income that you cannot outlive, because it could be, even though we've specified that the lifespan is 100, that somebody might live to 102. And if they did, they would still have Social Security income, and if they had the annuity, they would have that as well. So an annuity transfers longevity risk, the risk that you'll live a long time and have to fund it, from you to an insurance company, which is basically a group of, the insurance company is holding a pot of money for all the people who bought annuities and saying, we'll pay out the money in the pot to everybody who's still alive. So it means that to the extent that you annuitize, you have less concern about outliving your money, because the insurance company has said, we will pay you this amount every year for the rest of your life, a specified amount every year for the rest of your life. Unlike Social Security, income annuities are not inflation protected. The ones that are sold today, at least, are not inflation protected. They're no longer, inflation protected annuities are no longer available. So there is inflation risk associated with income annuities. But you have managed to pass off some longevity risk to the insurance company when you buy one. Now, there was the second question was similar, but not exactly the same. It had to do with different kinds of annuities, I think, Alex.
Yes, but just your general take on annuities, I think. I don't have it in front of me now because I'm looking at other questions.
Okay,
but,
so annuities is a very broad subject, and there's a wide variety of annuities. I think that what I would feel most comfortable saying in this context is that income annuities, single premium income annuities, or they're called SPIA, single premium immediate annuities, are a very useful retirement income tool. There are, and you can buy them in general. You should be able to buy a single premium immediate annuity, and you should be able to know what costs you're paying, and it's a competitive market, so you can get quotes from multiple carriers, and you can look at the solvency ratings or the quality of balance sheet ratings of the carriers, and you can look at what they're promising to pay, and you can make a choice on that basis. More complicated annuities, annuities that have two phases, an accumulation, an accumulation phase, and then later a distribution phase, which you may or may not use. In that accumulation phase, there are many features, bells and whistles, and they can be expensive, they can be hard to understand, and I am, let's say, less enthusiastic about those, because it's difficult to tell whether the extra benefits that are promised are worth the extra cost that you have to pay.
Okay, there's a number of people asking, how would you include a long-term care strategy into this plan? How would you include that?
The simple answer, well, there are a couple things you can do with Maxify, with long-term care. So you could do a scenario where you have a long-term care expense, and you could there are a number of places that you can get cost of care, and you could project a certain length of stay that's required for that cost of care, and so that would give you a set of costs that you would want to fund, and then you could consider a couple of scenarios: one where you save enough to fund that cost of care, and another where you buy long-term care insurance to fund that cost of care. And Maxify will, and you can use the functionality of Maxify to compare those two scenarios to each other. But you would include the premium for the long-term care insurance as a special expense, and you include the cost of care also as a special expense.
Right. And some people are also asking if you could just reiterate what the rate of return you're using here in this model and the inflation rate is.
Sure. So the rate of return, the nominal rate of return is 2.8, the inflation rate is 2.1, and the real rate is 0.6.
Okay.
And again, as I said, I know that Larry has adjusted his assumptions. I'm not recommending that people use these assumptions necessarily. I just wanted it to be clear what we were using.
Right. This is another general question from David. What are your thoughts on cash value life insurance, just generally?
If you plan to leave a bequest, and if you are going to invest in fixed income to leave that bequest, and if you can find a low-cost life insurance policy to do that, or if you, there's also life insurance policies called universal life insurance policies. I believe that there are very efficient universal life insurance policies. In those cases, it may be worthwhile to buy a whole life or cash value life policy. Those are, for most of our clients, pretty unusual stipulations. That is to say, if I ask our clients how much money they want to leave to their kids, the usual answer is, well, kind of whatever's left, as opposed to, I want to leave them a set amount. If you can specify the set amount and you want to stick to it, and you can find a very efficient policy, then it may be worthwhile. Basically, with a whole life insurance policy, you are trading off the cost of insurance that you do not need, because when you buy a whole life insurance policy, the difference between the cash value and the death benefit is insurance that you must pay for. And to the extent that, and so every year that you have the policy, and the policy has a death benefit that's greater than the cash value, you are paying for insurance to cover the difference. And especially if you have this policy after you retire, almost nobody needs life insurance after they retire. So that's a cost that you're paying that you otherwise would not pay. There are also administrative costs in the life insurance policy, and you are paying those costs so that you can get tax-free appreciation on the savings. And So you're trading off those costs against the taxes that you will save or that your heirs will save. And you can see that if those costs are high, if the policy is not efficient, then it's quite possible for those costs to swamp the benefits. And if we're thinking about stocks, if we're gonna invest in stocks to leave to our kids, the stocks, at least under current estate tax law, stocks get a step up in basis at death, and so there's no tax on the capital gain. And so if you have a relatively small estate, you're not going to be paying federal estate tax. Then again, the benefits for cash value life insurance, especially if you're investing in stocks, are going to be relatively small. And with interest rates as low as they are right now, the benefits to cash value life insurance, if you were going to invest that prospective bequest, if you were going to invest that in bonds, the tax savings you're going to get from cash value life insurance are going to be relatively small right now, because the tax on zero interest is zero.
Right. Okay. Here are two questions from Jeffrey and Tucker, and they're just sort of about what's going on politically and your thoughts. Jeffrey asks, I would like to ask Rick if he believes Trump's recent executive order deferring payroll taxes, one he pledges to make permanent if reelected, is such a threat to the Social Security Trust Fund that it makes sense to take Social Security benefits now as opposed to the advised strategy of waiting until age 70. So that's the first question. And then
let's take one question at a time if we can.
Yeah, okay,
Alex,
let's do that one. Sure, yeah. That's a broader question, yeah.
Yeah. The short answer is I wouldn't base my Social Security claiming strategy on that short-term potential change. First of all, it hasn't happened yet. Secondly, even if it does happen, it may be just a deferral of taxes instead of of tax receipts instead of a reduction in tax receipts. Third, even if it is a reduction in tax receipts, then you'd want to see what the trustees think. I think, what do they say about when the fund will be exhausted? What difference does it make to the potential benefit reduction as opposed to the potential tax increase? And then finally, and this is an area where I just have no expertise. You have to ask, and how would the Congress react? And you're not only are we trying to project how the trust fund will behave, but then we're trying to project what the composition of the Congress will be, what the composition of who the president will be, and how collectively they will interact in 2030 or 2033 or that's 10, 15 years from now. That's a complete imponderable. I think that you'd have to be projecting that the citizenry is really unhappy with Social Security. They really want to cut benefits, and there's a huge political constituency for that, and that I don't see right now.
Right. Okay. Well, so yeah, we'll keep doing one question at a time here. But here's another question from Tucker about. Well, in this case, this has already happened politically. He says, I keep hearing that and he wrote CARES Act, but he actually clarified the Secures Act is bad for IRAs and 401ks. Can Rick explain how the Secures Act is affecting them?
First of all, I've not made a big study of them. The big difference, I mean, there are a couple of things that a couple of changes in the law. One is that people don't have to take RMDs this year from IRAs, and that's a positive. That's a flag that gives you flexibility in terms of taking RMD or taking distributions when you want them rather than when you're forced to take them. So that's a small positive. He may be referring to the ability of heirs to stretch the distributions from IRAs over their lifetimes, which went away. Starting this year, inherited IRAs that are inherited by anyone other than a spouse, and there are other people who can also take it over their lifetimes, but it's a relatively small group of people. It's not people that Congress picked out. It's classes of people. But other than spouses and those classes of people, those who inherit IRAs must distribute the entire balance within 10 years. So that makes them less attractive to inherit. Instead of being able to take distributions over your lifetime, or perhaps over your lifetime, you now have to take them within 10 years. So that means that you get less tax deferral. In terms of deciding how much money you want to put into an IRA, I think it's pretty. Most people that we work with are not making IRA contributions thinking about their heirs. They're thinking about themselves. As far as those decisions are concerned, neither of the acts has any impact.
Going back to the Medicare Part B figure, just because a number of people are asking about it still. This is from Troy. He's just clarifying. He says, looks like you are using approximately a 3.5% inflation rate on the Medicare Part B cost to arrive at an average of $8,800. Is that correct?
This is straight out of Maxify. So it's Maxify. It's the Maxify projection, and then I averaged it over the retirement time period, the retirement period. That's all it is. It's I think and Maxify is using the law to project, but I did not make assumptions about growth rate or inflation rate or anything of the sort. Aside from the assumptions about inflation rate here, 2.8%.
Okay. This question is from Chris. He asked, does Rick include a change of inflation? Do you ever specify a change of inflation later on? Do you expect that? Just generally when you run?
No, we don't. I think it's hard enough to project inflation without projecting a change of inflation. You can look at 30-year Treasury rates and 30-year TIPS rates, and you can get a forecast of inflation from there. And 30 years is a long time. I think it would be, I would have a really hard time coming up with a view on how inflation is going to change in 2050, which is 30 years from now.
Very difficult.
I mean, you could do it. I don't know how I would do it, and I don't know.
So this is a question from Kathy, and this might be a little bit proprietary, so you can decide how you want to answer this. But she asked, so what Maxify output do you actually show clients when you run the program?
What Maxify output do we show clients?
Right, like what details of the reports are you showing them? Do you show it all, or?
Well, I think that to a certain extent that depends on the client. Some clients, a relatively small number of clients, but some want to see all the output. So we'll share all the output. You know, all the multi worksheet workbook in all its glory. In other cases, we're going to focus on, we do this chart. We'll do a chart that's similar to this one. We'll do one that shows income over time, one that shows spending over time. We use a lifetime balance sheet. I think that's, and then we have a couple of tables where we talk about the Monte Carlo results, which are really important.
Right. Okay, let me find another question here. Oh, yes, well, along those lines, Sean asked, how do you model typical stock market-based portfolios with the much higher expected returns in Maxify? It seems way too conservative to model the entire asset base using a risk-free, essentially zero return.
Right. Here's how we do this. We do the plan, the base plan, with the risk-free rate, because that's the only way that we can get present values, because the risk-free rate is the only rate at which we can be confident of the returns we're going to get. And you need a fixed return to get a present value. Then we run Monte Carlo, and we run Monte Carlo with stocks in it, and we run portfolios with different percentages of allocation to stocks that help clients think through how much stock allocation they want in their portfolio. And you can adjust spending to reflect that. You can adjust current spending to reflect that. Maxify is very sophisticated in that regard, and it allows you to make assumptions about how spending will adjust in response to changes in investment returns on a year-to-year basis. But that's way beyond the scope of what we've talked about here.
Right.
And I'd hesitate to go into that too deeply because I don't have charts, and without charts, it's, I think, pretty difficult to talk about. But we're not assuming that there will not be stock returns. It's rather that when one assumes stock returns, then we're introducing just a lot of variance into the plan, and it's really hard to plan that way.
Let's see here. This question is from Mark. Given low rates of real return, when does it make sense to pay off debt, such as mortgage, using savings from your IRA, for example?
Well, let's break savings into different categories here. So let's start with it's a good idea to have liquid assets that you can use to address emergencies, and those can be bonds, or those can be I-bonds, or they can be CDs or savings accounts, or something. But one should have a chunk of ready purchasing power that one can use. I mean, we just came through a period of time when it would have been lovely to have ready purchasing power, and where it was difficult if you didn't have ready purchasing power. You know, people couldn't work, and or some people couldn't work, and they weren't getting for a while. They weren't getting support from anyone from the federal government, and the people who had liquidity were in better shape than those that didn't. So you take that and you set that aside. Then you say, now I have savings beyond that, and on those savings, I am earning basically zero. And on my mortgage, I am paying. We don't know, but I can guess that it's at least 3%, maybe 4%. So there's a big opportunity to improve your financial position by paying off the mortgage there. You're in effect making 4%, or whatever the difference is between your mortgage rate and what you're earning on cash, by paying down that mortgage. Now, if you have assets in an IRA and you're younger than 59 and a half, to take money out of the IRA, you're going to pay a tax penalty, and you're going to pay taxes, which you're going to pay anyway. But then you're going to pay 10%, and 10% is way more than you're going to benefit from, unless you've got a 20% mortgage or something like that. You're not going to want to take money out of the IRA to do that, and in general, I'd be cautious about taking money out of retirement accounts to pay off a mortgage, because the money that you've got in the retirement accounts and the IRA and the 401k, that has the account has with it, associated with a tax deferral, and if you take the money out, you can't put it back. So there's kind of an optionality associated with the money in the IRA, and there's a value to that option, which is, I think, difficult to quantify. So I'd be reluctant to do that, I think.
Okay, so we're going to finish questions at the end of the hour. So we're going to have a couple more here. We have about 11 minutes left, and we still have about 500 people on, which is great. But it also means that there's lots and lots of questions. So I just want to remind people, if you feel that you've asked a question that really hasn't been answered today, just feel free to email me at alex@economicsecurityplanning.com, and I'll see if I can help you out. This is a question from Lee. Just going back to the y'alls here, do the quote, the numbers that you're using here, you're assuming that the couple will die broke, no?
Right. That's right. That's right. So if the couple wanted to leave money to someone, then we would put that as a bequest in Maxify, and then that would require them to have more before they retired.
And also a number of people are asking about, just back to the discretionary versus non-discretionary spending categories. Some people are a little bit confused about where rent or home ownership falls into those categories.
Rent and home ownership are going to be housing expenses in Maxify, and they're going to be fixed. They're not going to be discretionary. Yeah, let's hang on here. Let's do this. Here we go. So in Maxify, all of the expenses on the right, except discretionary spending, are fixed. So housing expenses, the other expenses which are going to be special expenses, federal and state taxes, retirement account contributions, if you made 529 contributions, if you chose a reserve fund, the Medicare Part B premiums, life insurance premiums, all of those are considered to be fixed. And discretionary spending is calculated as follows. You take the fixed expenses, you subtract them from the lifetime income, from the resources, and what's left is this discretionary spending, and then that's smoothed over the lifetime. So in this simple case, this would be divided by 45. Right? Because these guys are retiring, I guess it's 60, so we divide it by 40. No, sorry, they're at 55. This is a balance sheet at 55, 45 years to go. You divide this by 45.
So we have a number of questions about Social Security, and I know you're not a Social Security expert, but I think that, let's see, I think this is a decent question from Bob. It's a little complicated, but let's see. It just gets back to the central question of whether to delay or not. And he asks, if you look at total benefits received to date, the benefits of delaying claiming Social Security begin to accrue after age 82. So dying prior to that age results in fewer total Social Security benefits. Similarly, any changes in benefits would impact the amount received if you delay by a greater amount. Can you address this?
Well, say that. So let's try this. A lot of people, when they're thinking about Social Security and the Social Security claiming decision, they're thinking about it as an investment decision. And they do things like look for the break-even point, right? So I could claim at 62, but I don't claim at 62. So if I wait until 63, I've given up that benefit that I could have had, right? And I'm investing that is the argument, right? And then and so on subsequently, right? So each year or each month of benefits that I don't take is another investment that I'm making. And then I'm going to attempt to look at my return on investment by calculating the extra benefits that I got after I claimed, minus the benefit, or calculating those extra benefits, and then I add up all the extra benefits, and I relate that to the benefits I didn't get, and I ask for, what was my rate of return on investment? And I assert, and I think a lot of economists would assert, that it is not an investment question, because Social Security benefits are not investment returns. It's more accurate to think of Social Security benefits as a lifetime annuity, and therefore it is insurance that we are buying, not an investment that we are making. And each year of benefits that we forego is like a premium that we're paying for the extra annuity. So I think the more analytically correct way of doing the analysis is to look at the foregone benefit and consider it as a premium that's being paid for a larger insurance benefit and a larger annuity payment. And if you do that, then the interesting thing to do is to compare it to a commercial annuity. And when we did that, when there were inflation-adjusted annuities available, the payout on those extra years or on the years of benefits foregone was 8%, and the commercial annuities that were inflation protected were paying 4%. It was sort of blindingly obvious that Social Security was the better deal. Now, and even if you say I'm expecting benefits to be reduced by 10 or 11%, we're still getting a return on our premium, if you will. Instead of 8%, take 10% less than 8%. So that's going to be 7.2 or something like that. So it's still going to be a lot better than the commercial annuity premiums were. And that was before interest rates were lower. And when interest rates come down, payout rates come down too. So Social Security is the only inflation-protected annuity going. The payout rate for deferring is extremely good. So unless you would not buy a standard annuity because you know that your life expectancy is short, and if your life expectancy is short, then buying an annuity is not a good idea because you're going to be, in effect, subsidizing all the people who think that their life expectancies are longer. And the same is true with Social Security, right? But otherwise, if we think about it as an annuity purchase, it makes an enormous amount of sense to wait, regardless of whether you think benefits are going to be reduced or not. Unless you think that benefits are going to be reduced, I would say almost catastrophically, right? So if you think benefits are going to be reduced by 50% or more, all right, maybe you want to draw early because you think that benefits are going to be reduced by that amount. But otherwise, I think that it's kind of the best retirement deal going.
Maybe Larry wants to just add on to that if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out something to say that was different than what Rick just said, but I realized that I think he said it much better than what I was going to say, much better than I would have put it. It's actually it's really a insurance product. We have to worry about the catastrophic event, which is we live to 100. Just like we focus on the worst case scenario when we buy car insurance, totaling the car, health insurance having a hugely expensive treatment, house burning down, that's what we think about with fire insurance or homeowners insurance. Here, the financial catastrophe is living and continuing to have to pay for yourself. So having this much higher check, it's roughly 70% higher after inflation if you wait till 70, the monthly check, than if you take it at 62, is enormously valuable in terms of insurance. And Rick said correctly that if you go into Maxify and you specify maybe even a 20% benefit cut and compare waiting till 70 versus taking the money at 62, it'll still show an enormous gain from waiting till 70. So I don't think we're really going to have any cuts that go beyond 20%, and that's not likely either. It's most likely that we'll have tax increases. The other thing I want to say that economics says is it doesn't tell you to assume for sure that you're going to make it to 100 or to your maximum age of life. But what it says is that's the proper planning horizon. And the way you deal with the uncertainty of not making it that long, the likelihood that you'll die sooner than then, is to, if you're not super risk averse, super worried about your living standard when you're 100, then what you would do is plan to spend relatively less when you're older. So as you age, have your living standard fall gradually. So in the under settings and assumptions in Maxify, there's something called the standard of living index. You can tell the program, for example, starting at 75, you want your living standard to drop by 1% every year. And that will lead the program to have you, save less and spend more earlier on, and spend relatively less later on. And that's how you deal with uncertainty in economics, according to economic theory. You don't assume you're going to die on time. You don't assume you're going to die for sure before your maximum age of life. Instead, you plan through your maximum age of life. You look at the catastrophic event, but then you take a risk on not making it that long by designing your spending path so that it declines gradually starting at some age in old age. Rick, I think we've come to 4 o'clock, to the end of the time. I'm sure you're probably a little bit exhausted. You did a fantastic job discussing the two connected issues that you really connected very well. When can I retire and what's my number? So thanks a million for doing this. And this video of your presentation, as well as the video of the Q&A responses, they'll both be posted in a few days at maxifyplanner.com/webinars. I'll be doing another webinar. I think the next one I'll probably will be on getting the most out of retirement accounts. And then after that, I'll do probably a couple weeks later one on getting house rich. And then we'll have other webinars by myself and others in the company or other financial planners using Maxify throughout the fall and into the spring. So please keep coming back. Please go to the website, see the webinars you haven't seen yet or can't make in the future. But also do us a favor and spread the word about the webinars. Everybody's invited, whether or not they are customers or not. We want to help everybody in the country to maximize their financial welfare in these, particularly in these very difficult times. Thanks again, Rick. Bye-bye.